All right. Hello, all, and welcome to the Brave Sound podcast. We have a special episode for you guys today where we will be having a conversation with Mr. Robert Buonaspina. But first, let me back up a moment. This is the show where we uncover the stories, processes, and worldviews behind some of New York City's most creative and artful musicians. Robert Buonaspina is a New York City-based composer, arranger, pianist, organist, violist, and educator. He received his master's degree in jazz composition from the Manhattan School of Music, where he was a student of Jim McNeely and Phil Markowitz. As a composer and arranger, he has had his work performed around the world, including Hamburg, Germany, or the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, the beautiful church. Last month, Robert was the recipient of the International Society of Jazz Arrangers and Composers Chuck Owen Prize in Jazz Composition, where his work for jazz ensemble Smile Pretty will be soon recorded and performed by the WDR Big Band in Cologne, Germany. Whether as an arranger or a music copyist, Robert has collaborated with heavy hitters across the scene, including Joel Ross, Candace Hoyes, Grammy-winning producer Larry Klein, and Stephen Feige. Robert also maintains a schedule as an active pianist and violist in the greater New York City area, sharing the stage with several key figures in New York, including Layla Hathaway, Vince Mendoza, Ralph LaLama, Melissa Arrico, and Alice Ripley. Robert holds a full-time position as well as director of music and organist of St. Pancras Roman Catholic Church in Glendale, Queens, and runs an arranging, production, and education studio out of his own apartment on the Upper West Side. And I personally have known Rob since my junior year of high school, where we played together in the same big band, and I have always known him to be a super duper, super hard worker. So to start off, I'd like to try to define the terms with you, Rob, arranger and music copyist, because you use them in your bio, and while composer, organist, educator, these terms many people understand, I feel like those two terms specifically, people may not know what they are exactly. So since you do them for a lot of people, maybe we can start off with just how you would define those roles of an arranger and music copyist.
Right. Well, firstly, thank you both for having me. It's a huge honor to be here, and I was blushing a few times as you read my self-aggrandizing biography. But I appreciate you guys having me on the show. First and foremost, it's an honor to know both of you. I do know Mike back from my undergrad days at Hofstra when I was a music ed major, and we played in the big band together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as that question goes, the role of arranger and composer is often, obfuscated, as you get into the depths of composition, like how much you're composing when you're arranging. In the terms of a practical sense, oftentimes what I'm hired to do as a musician or what I'm hired to do as an arranger is really, realize people's music for the appropriate context. In this case, various engagements I had with some of the people I listed in my bio, it was mostly, a music copying, like some sorts of things where a song that already exists needed to be charted out, and then I, with the appropriate amount of license, could use my own arranging chops to make some educated decisions about what's happening in the music. But really, it varies per engagement. I think. As a composer and arranger, those two often overlap with my own work, and then when I have a lot of license to work with other people, but really in specific to whatever the job entails itself, I really just try to go with what the client needs or whatever whatever happens there. Music copying, just to make it clear, music copying is the art of realizing a manuscript or in some cases transcribing something and then curating and creating a manuscript for performers or for analysis. So in this case, a lot of the things I was doing, I was transcribing from recordings and then making on Sibelius or another notation program, making some sort of lead sheet or some sort of edified, recognizable piece of music for people to reference. That's really what it is. It's just kind of like cleaning things up and, you know, double checking based on a set of rules. But arranging, of course, you know, is totally, you know, that's the two can overlap, but that's, you know, really where composition and arranging kind of overlap, that kind of thing. Hope that clarifies.
Yeah, that does. Would you say with being a music copyist yourself, would you say that line of work is more so just like a process of working out, and there's not so much creativity in doing it, or would you say it is creative and an art in itself?
Yeah, I would say that you know, you first and foremost, like with any sort of practice, you want to make sure that you have the fundamentals down first, and then you can take liberties on top of them. Like there are definitely fundamentals when it comes to even intermediate music copying, like such as, you know, where to put the first and second ending on a bar line, on a system rather, or, you know, spacing of eighth notes, or, you know, whether or not to include an anacrusis at the end, or, you know, there's a lot of variable things, and there are reference guides for that, like the great Elaine Gould book Behind Bars. But you know, while there are things you can follow, sometimes if the client or the project allows for it, you can take liberties in using your own input to make something perhaps more transparent for the performers, like making something a vamp section instead of written out 8 bars or something. But that's something that really depends on the situation, depends on the context.
Yeah. Have you dealt... What was the hardest person you've dealt with? You don't have to give a name per se, but you can give...
Myself. That is the answer. That the person who's unequivocally, without like by 10 miles stretch, is my own music, and writing down, I mean, engraving what I hear in my head, and then having that as something recognizable for players, and then spending all this time on rehearsal talking about engraving decisions I made in 3 minutes that, you know, that somehow become like telephone affected into some sort of unrecognizable caricature of what I've written. That is definitely, you know, I definitely struggle with that sort of like telephone effect of like getting to the page, getting to the musician, knowing the musician, and having them extract that information like through this language I'm trying to communicate to them. Of course, that's a very like binary way of approaching you know, music performance, because there's always, you know, you know the player that you're working with, but yeah, that I definitely have struggled with clarity with my own music. You know, is this really what I want? Is this the best way I can communicate this? And is this the most efficient way I communicate this? You know, the two married together often create a very riveting situation for me to deal with. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. I definitely want to dive into some of the practicalities of just realizing music in the kind of context that you're usually put in, Rob. And it's pretty epic to watch when it happens. You know, I've gotten the opportunity to play and see a lot of your wildest creations for orchestral things and string quartets and big bands and all these things. But what you're describing here of how do I communicate my ideas to musicians, for me, as a principally small ensemble player, I always take the approach of I teach my band music by ear pretty much all the time, and I just expect people to be at a caliber where they can memorize it, and I do compose it with that in mind. Like I try to compose very simply, very melodically, very memorably, just because I feel like that gives a better result. But for you, like, just the practicalities of, you can't teach 20 big band members or 50 orchestral members their parts by ears, and they're sure as hell not going to memorize it for you, you know. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like your meticulousness with engraving and with the way you present your music on the page, it really comes from this practical limitation. Can you describe, I just want to go a little deeper in depth on this idea of how do I communicate with the page, and if you had any other practical limitations that you've found with dealing with large ensembles.
Yeah, it really, I mean, even in the even in the most personal of contexts where you have your own ensemble, like if that's the case where you can still realize that vision of working with a group, you can still like realize your vision of understanding each player individually and having a cohesive element emerge out of that. But in the case where using a different sense of the word practical, like a different practical sense of where where I've been presenting my arrangements has been for some sort of like I don't want to say unpersonalized group, but like some sort of ad hoc group that is either assembled by, would be Manhattan School Music, or would be some sort of very realistic context of where I subcontracting players and I don't really work with them all the time. Although I do plan to shift that. I would like of course my own group and people that understand my music and people I can communicate to on the weekly basis, or especially after COVID ends. But right now I think a really important thing as a composer is to be able to adjust, to be able to write music that can transparently kind of withstand all of these barriers of will this player understand that, and this player may not understand that, but will this be transparently clear for both player A and player B? And it does get tricky. It does get tricky to write music on a personalized level, because ultimately the sound that comes out is the sound that's 99% that person, right? It's informed by their own choices. So I really try to write clearly in direction, in verbal direction, with one or two words that lets the person bring what they have to the table, and then kind of amalgamate a cohesive element based on individual input. Like different people coming together and creating sort of one cohesive sound based on what they understand the phrase to be. And of course that comes back to my my kind of rudimentary example of you need to have the basics down of how to write for ensembles, and how to write a phrase like exactly as you envision it, in terms of just like where the phrase begins and ends, like with slurring or with dynamic markings or with whatever. And then in that case, you are hopefully equipping your players with the most information, so that their personal voice can shine through regardless of the context. So that means like very clear understanding of where the form is in the part, like who's playing around them, right? I've certainly been guilty of not including that information, and it is helpful to other people. So you want to get as much as you can. You want to get the best out of people with how you write and how you present it to them.
Is this idea at all inspired by the Ellington Band and the way they conducted themselves with individuality in mind?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I that any sort of like, any sort of big band that's kind of like, the NASA group, or even any sort of like, large ensemble where people are playing together all the time and they have that personal connection. I don't think that kind of falls in verse to the idea of engraving and like presenting things, because those were often just handwritten manuscripts, right? Like right. The Ellington Strayhorn records, those were mostly handwritten manuscripts and just written for people and stuff. And I wouldn't think that those players, after a certain point, I mean, they just knew exactly how to write, knew exactly how to read what was written for them. In the case of presenting music so it's extremely clear, that's kind of that dance you have to do with understanding the player as an individual and getting the best out of them regardless of who they are, so that you can get that result right on the bandstand. But certainly, yeah, any sort of large ensemble that has familiarity will achieve this concept much more easily than people that are meeting together ad hoc. Yeah.
But when you're talking about making the music as clear as possible, it makes me think, and also like, I don't think you mentioned it directly, but also you have to account for the level of musicianship. Like, for example, correct me if I'm wrong, but a nice amount of business from composers can be from education, right? Like writing big band music for schools and whatnot. And have you ever wrote music specifically tailored to like a certain level of musicianship? Because I know that you can definitely write like the broad spectrum from like super advanced stuff, like you can put a lot of demands on the musicians that you write for. But have you ever had to deal with like more of an educational context piece?
Yeah, I, I just a working knowledge of notation software. I've dealt with many contexts where just a few weeks ago I designed a piano book, a beginner piano book for my nephew who's 4 years old, right?
Oh, that's lovely.
It was accompanied with pictures of his brother, and I think he liked it. I haven't really heard much about it yet, but that was a super rudimentary book. Like 10 pages of just super big notes on a staff, just piano right hand stuff like C position, fingerings, and all that. That like stuff like that. Like I really, I don't really try to engage or marry myself to the content. I think a great composer should be able to write their heart even in simple stuff that they're contriving for a specific scenario, right? And that sometimes is difficult for me. I'm very fortunate. I have the opportunity to work with a really great pool of volunteer and professional cantors at my job, and where I'm a music director at a church. And oftentimes, like when there's a special event coming up, I'll arrange music, for people that are trained musicians, but of course not like the conservatory degree of like all this hyper like understanding like mixed meter and stuff. But I do understand the potential of people. If you present the music correctly in the right context, you can bring out the best potential people, even non-conservatory trained musicians or whomever. You have people looking at music, and they can see the form clearly, and they understand like this is a organ interlude, or this is where this player comes in, or whatever's happening. I think regardless of the scenario, as long as you write clearly, cohesively, and you are able to still put your own voice in it without becoming too complex or dense for the listener and the player, those, I think, just generate a successful piece of music. And I think it's regardless of level, regardless of who's playing.
Yeah. Another part of that, though, is knowing the instruments themselves really well. Just because then you would know like what the limitations are for a certain instrument. Like forget like obviously odd time signatures are a lot trickier to understand for everybody, and stuff like that. That's like that's like kind of like obvious stuff. But what about like how did you learn like the limitations of, for example, like a French horn player, or because like when you write orchestral stuff a lot, so you have to understand all these different instruments so well. So like what are your tips for understanding these instruments?
Yeah, like I have general advice, and then I have kind of like where I came from. I'm not familiar with, I consider myself still kind of rudimentary understanding of French horn, but I was very fortunate, in my undergrad, some of my best friends were French horn players. I took a lot of methods classes as an education major in undergrad that helped me to understand the band instruments. We had a pretty rigorous curriculum when it came to like orchestration and instrumental technique. I took some brass methods classes, and I took some instrumental classes where I got to understand. But really, I think the number one thing in my development as a musician and understanding how to write for French horn or anything is just listening to the great French horn concerti, listening to sorry, one sec. So, listening to like any sort of like piece that prominently features the French horn in a solo or whatever, right? So, that was kind of where my training came from, is just from a lot of listening.
Yeah.
Like really listening, like really hearing it, and hearing the character and all of the quirks and everything in the French horn. And still a growing, certainly, definitely a growing process for me as a writer or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe like name some pieces. Like, were there any pieces that had like maybe orchestral pieces that had a big impact on you that maybe you transcribed or?
Oh yeah, man. My favorite work of all time. My current favorite work of all time. That doesn't make any sense. That's I mean, I love one of my great heroes is Jorge Colangeli. I could write his name in the chat. Just if you want to like have this information. He's a fantastic orchestrator and LA based, so he did a lot of work for like Barbra Streisand and so many people. There's this one collaboration he did with Eddie Daniels. And I forget which symphony orchestra, but it was a clarinet concerto he had written specifically for the great classical and jazz clarinetist Eddie Daniels, called Concerto for Jazz Clarinet. 3 movements, and the first and third movement are very short in duration, but there's so much content, so much like Hollywood-esque orchestration in them. You really hear it come through. It's one of my favorite concerti of all time, and the second movement's just beautiful. It's just the orchestration is just outstanding, and while I would say like there's certain things that I would reference, like for understanding certain instruments, like maybe like a Dvorak symphony might have a great French horn solo, or maybe like a certain work might be best suited for like understanding the range of the oboe. I think there are some truly great orchestrational masterworks where you can hear the role in the whole picture. You like, even if there's not a French horn solo, you hear the French horn being used in a pragmatic way. You hear it in the middle of a texture. You hear a lot of Gil Evans, right? I mean, anything Gil Evans, like using the French horn nestled in this kind of like really dense but beautiful structure that he creates. I would say like but in terms of just works that have inspired me, I mean, there's so much great stuff with that orchestra. I would say John Williams is a fantastic orchestrator. Of course, he's very well known, but I always just find myself listening to his stuff. I really love this one album. What's it called? If I can just look it up really quick.
Is it from a movie?
No, not. Oh, John Williams. I mean, just anything by him would be great. There's this one album. If I can just look it up on my phone really quick.
Yeah. I didn't even. Was it like from a movie though? Like I didn't even know if he composed music outside of film scores or not.
John.
Yeah, I know. He has a tuba concerto, right? He's a very well known.
I didn't know about the tuba concerto, but he was, before he was a film score, he was a jazz pianist, and he has a record playing jazz piano out.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I haven't really checked it out, but
so there's
yeah.
Another album I was referencing that that is an amazing orchestrational masterpiece in terms of like also setting groove. Anything that features the Metropole Orchestra, I mean, they're the preeminent eclectic group that plays European classical music extremely well, as do they play Black American music, as do they play any sort of like Latin American like they really nestle themselves into whatever the groove entails, and those are musicians that have very diverse eclectic upbringing that are bringing so much to the table, and they all just fit right in really well. That's an amazing group. I also want to give a shout out to the Orquestra Sinfónica do Estado de São Paulo, which I'm definitely butchering for my Portuguese/Brazilian friends here, featuring the Banda Mantiqueira. There's this beautiful album that I've been checking out recently. A lot of this stuff's just like recent checking out as well. I could write the name here, but this is just this really amazing album of like traditional Brazilian music and arrangements of a lot of like MPB or music popular brasileiro. it's just it's like a whole diverse array of like Brazilian styles in this one album, and it's interesting to hear this amazing master orchestration by mostly by I think it's Nelo Proveta, who's a prominent Brazilian clarinetist, a woodwind specialist, and arranger. He's a fantastic person. He did a lot of the arrangements for this record, and it's amazing hearing his voice. Like you hear so much just pulling from like Stravinsky or Nelson Riddle, or like
That's a sentence you don't hear very often.
Yeah, no. There's so much. There's so many colors, like Ravel. I mean, so many different arrays of colors that come through in this orchestration stuff, and that's really all I care about. Like, getting through to the listener via, extremely well crafted music that pays homage in some way to these styles that work, pioneered through these other people that have done it in the past. And this album is a great example of that. I can write the full name out maybe after the interview or something.
Sure, we can add it. But yeah, a array of colors. I mean, I think that would be a good way of describing, what I've gotten to play and hear from you. It's like, this is one of the great highlights of speaking with you, Rob, as the audience is getting some taste of. It's just like how much of a, I don't want to say scholar, but like how much of a enthusiast or like a true passionate lover of so many different styles you are. Like we've literally had conversations about Gregorian chant quite recently, and then we would talk about Stevie Wonder, and then you go off and talk about Ginga and these Brazilian influences, and then you're deep in the classical tradition and you write choral music for your church, and it's very inspiring. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how the hell that happened. Were you always brought up like this, like everywhere master of like interest in like so many different styles?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, and I would reckon to say and kind of reiterate, yeah, that's not at all kind of scholarship, but just a genuine interest in all this stuff. And and I think anyone that's passionate or a music lover really is completely valid in whatever they like. I mean, I really try not to eschew any music style. I mean, anything that people are bringing and creating with their own heart. I mean, it's not. No one's in any place, I think, to eschew that. Certainly. I mean, I have my own gripes, like stylistically, with some music, but it's not. That's just an aesthetic thing, and that's just like a flaw that I have to work on in myself. I think if someone has a visceral experience from it, even if there's music that no one on the planet likes, if there's someone created some song 30 years ago and like no one has listened to it, and like even the person that wrote it hates it, like that music still deserves to be loved. I mean, it's whatever you intend. So I was very fortunate. I mean, I was raised I was raised playing piano, violin, and viola, and I had a really great array of orchestra experiences growing up. I got the experience of playing in violin and viola. I also sang. I sang in my undergraduate chorale, chamber choir, and the vocal jazz group. So I have, about 4 years of experience in a lot of diverse repertoire that exists for, choir as well. And of course, I really just was very fortunate. I mean, what I take out of that question is I was just very fortunate to have an eclectic experience of working with several musicians, and and I think whatever you are your experience, and whatever you bring to the table in your own voice is who you are, right? I mean, and I'm consistently refining, what do I want to sound like? What I sounded like 2 years ago? Do I want to create music that even 0.0001% sounds like something I would be playing in church if it wasn't intended that way, just because this is who I am, right? I really try to avoid that. Like if I'm trying to create music that is working in a specific facade or giving off a specific affect for the listener, really try not to project my own experiences on it. That's actually a kind of conviction I hold as a writer. I try not to make it so obvious, like my upbringing. I mean, I do kind of, relay what I have about my craft, and if there is enough generous room for my own voice to shine through in what I do, then I'll allow it. But usually I really try not to. I try to, make it about what the music calls for and what the listener is expecting. Not so much. So if that answers your question, I don't know if that directly answered. Like,
well, it gives
I
me
have a lot.
It
Sorry,
gives me
what?
a lot about like your mindset and how you think about the world of music and how loving and appreciative you are of art and human creativity. Like that's, I mean, obviously there's a lot to be said maybe by parenting and educators for why that is, and maybe just part of it is just the way you are, But it makes a lot of sense, and it does answer like how you came to be this so appreciative and well versed in so many things. But what you were saying there at the end, where you tried to kind of put more emphasis on, you said what will affect the listener and what they want to hear and what the music calls for rather than your own voice. And I love the way you said, if there's generous room for my voice to come, then I'll add it there. But are you speaking generally there? Are you speaking about commissions for other people, or?
No, this is general. If I'm writing a piece, I separate myself from the piece as much as possible.
Wow.
And I think there's some truth to that for everyone. I think, when you're listening to anything, or you're doing any sort of mix, or if you're painting a picture, or you're making food, you come back to it and you taste it again, and you're having a completely different experience. Right? I mean, we change over the course of time. We change over, even 30 seconds, right? Or if something happens, or if someone buzzes the door, we might get a little frustrated, and we go back to eating our food, and it tastes different, right? We're having a different visceral experience with what we're interacting with, right? So I think in terms of music, I think it's super, super important for the composer to be evaluating, like, to be evaluating what is an objective approach to what the music calls for. Not so much what is the listener expecting, because you don't have to write for the listener, but what is, how can my music be evaluated in several different ways? Like, I'm looking at it right now, but I understand the impermanence of who I am as a person. I understand that anything can change over time, right? I can revisit this music in 30 seconds and totally hate, right? I could totally hate what I wrote. I think it's really important to separate the artist from the music, because you need that level of, I would say, maturity and understanding that whether or not it's a shared experience, it still ultimately stands for itself, and it can't necessarily be something that you're invested in at that moment. I think a healthy level of objectivity is really important for all of this.
Wow. And then over the course of a body of work, with all these changes in identity and style and choices and fluidity that you're talking about, there still tends to be something cohesive about it. Like, think of probably the most diverse artists of the 20th century is just like Miles Davis, but Miles Davis is Miles Davis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think this mindset that you're speaking of, this objectivity, is kind of like very key for growth, but it's probably not even as deviant as you think it is, because we all have very narrow boxes of how we see ourselves, how we hear ourselves, and and even just continually pushing yourself outside of it, or trying to view it from the outside, it's the fuel for growth, Otherwise, you're like, I don't know, the Fast and Furious movies, where they're on like Fast and Furious 10, and they're all the same thing, or like the 13th season of The Bachelor or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think, even if your mindset is to be creating the same thing over and over again, and you want to stay to your style, that's fine. I mean, like, there's no shame in redundancy. There's no shame in writing the same crap, as long as you eventually have revisited that or visited that and made from a higher plane or from an objective plane, and you've made the conscious decision to comfort yourself in that artistic output, right? I'm comfortable with what I'm releasing. I'm confident with what I'm releasing, and I'm going to release it with conviction, whatever the hell that is, as long as it's not hurting anyone, or as long as it's not racist or whatever, like overtly like terrible, right? Whatever you're releasing, like, should be just a reflection of you, and a reflection of you having objectified it through different lens, whatever that means to you. I personally see that as hearing it through the listener, hearing it through myself 30 seconds after the fact, thinking about how I would have written it a year ago, how I would have written it a year from now, thinking about what I hear in my friends' music and how I can, relate that to, if I'm fortunate to know who the player is, how I can write that in. I really, and I'm not trying to, like, tell myself as, like, oh, like, so selfish or what other people do. I mean, ultimately, I think it is this battle between, because you're ultimately the person writing your music. Of course it's going to sound like you. Yeah. I mean, there's so much like, there's so much sequence, like, that I play on organ that comes through in a lot of the stuff I write, just by nature of that's what I'm hearing, because whether it's, right after Sunday, I get back into compositional sketching. I'm like, oh, this sounds cool, even though it was a lot of the stuff I was either playing as a prelude on organ. And, like, the stuff that mushes you, it mushes you into this mold of, okay, yeah, this is what I'm writing, this is how I'm going to present it, and I can't control that it's been, that it is that it's been ultimately impacted by what I've done as an artist, right, and what I'm doing as an artist. So I think, being able to separate yourself like that, and being forgiving to yourself if you do sound like yourself, is okay. I mean, the main point, if you take anything away, is just, like, being forgiving to yourself as a creator, and allowing yourself to give yourself the objective room to make the decision of, is this what I want to sound like, or if I don't want to sound like this, can I reevaluate this in some way?
I think that's a really difficult mindset to be in for anybody, to try to look at what you're doing from an outside perspective, because it's very easy to think, I am this way, and to justify it by some means necessary. People, I'm guilty of it. Everyone's guilty of doing that. Whether it's with eating healthy or working out or anything, music making, where your career is. So, like, what are some specific tactics or, like, questions that you ask yourself when, like, let's say you're writing a piece of music, and then you're concerned about whether it's maybe a little too self-indulging, or you want to just make sure that it's okay. Like, what would you ask yourself?
Oh man, if I want to create, well, first of all, I'm asking myself, is this what the people that I'm writing this for are expecting? If it's like a commission, or if it's like something I'm writing for a specific ensemble, is this something that the players will understand, in terms of, like, this is obviously firstly in their idiom, like, this is something at big band, like, they're going to understand as big band musicians. Like, am I going to write consordino, or am I going to write with mute? First of all, we're going to have to establish a shared language here, right? Am I going to write out a classical percussion part, like a Western art music, like, like completely written out, like verbose jumble of notes that would exist, in a score, like it would exist in an orchestral score, but would I write that out for drum set? Probably not, because I want to reach people in the shared idiom that makes sense to them, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's the first thing, like making sure that the idiom makes sense to them. And then the second thing is, in terms of the content itself, if I have the license to be developing the source material, and curating the content and making it my own voice. If it's something I'm creating from the ground up, inevitably I'm going to give myself the authority to act like myself in whatever I'm writing, right?
Yeah.
If it's an arrangement of something that someone has done, and I'm being paid for it, especially, I'm really not going to try to take selfish risks. But it is difficult. Like it is super difficult, and I think any composer would tell you that you're constantly reevaluating what it means to arrange something and then what it means to impose new material onto something, and if it truly fits. In terms of a tangible tactic, now getting to that part of the question, after we've we want to make sure that the players, I'm reaching them in a shared language, and that I can communicate to them in a way that's not too overwhelming, and that it's my own music. I think like a tangible tactic I think to use to reevaluate my own music would just be taking time away from it. Certainly feedback in rehearsal, as I'm learning with this current project, is super crucial. Regardless of how much it might hurt, or regardless of how much it might challenge what your original idea was, ultimately, the word of the performer is sacrosanct. Whatever body is delivering your material is a living, breathing person that has to breathe life into your material, 100% of them. What they have to say is can never be disputed. That is an indisputable fact. I've been certainly guilty of thinking, oh, they can do this, and I should just be patient with them, and they should just practice it and stuff. But ultimately, if it comes down to a reassessment of what the composition entails, you have to listen to your performers. So I'm thinking about it as a performer, right? As someone that would read it, as a pianist, as someone that would take time away from the music. I'm evaluating what the music's going to sound like when I listen to it 30 seconds from now, or if I listen to it 2 hours from now, right? And then, another kind of tangible tactic that would help me out is going to the source, I guess. I'm really just thinking about these answers now, and I'm thinking about my own experience of writing. Going to the source of where you originally conceived an idea is really important, and I think that should be crucially defended. And I know, from some master classes I've taken, some of my professors, they would agree with that idea, that the power of the voice memo is unprecedented. The power of being able to pick up your phone, find an app, click voice memo. That's 4 seconds, right?
Yeah.
When in history have you been able to capture the room and exactly as you were feeling 4 seconds after that? Right? Not because you're writing and you hear the room as you're writing and conceiving the idea. Okay, let me get my phone. You capture basically 99.9999% of that. And the only thing that changed between you and the voice memo recording is you. Right? So you're hearing it objectively. That's going back to the role of objectivity is you're listening to a voice memo, and how many times have you guys listened to your own stuff, and you're you're listening oh, I really dig this, I'm going to try to expand on this. I hear what I was saying. Okay, I wouldn't have done that. Specifically a voice. There's obviously recordings you have done and stuff, but that's stuff that you prepared for. I'm talking about the spontaneous, this idea is really cool, let me record it. And then listening to how you developed with it then. You're a completely different person. That's just where I come from as a composer that uses the voice memo app almost religiously. Anything, even if it's an idea for going to the grocery store and picking up something in a different order. I'll use the voice memo app, and I think it's more efficient or whatever. I just think it's a really fantastic tool that everyone has if you're fortunate to have a smartphone, some sort of audio recording device on your smartphone, instantaneous. So that's another thing I would say to answer that question. Tangible tactic to be able to objectify your music and hear it through a different lens almost immediately is preserve it. Preserve the voice memo. Write down what you need to do. Don't be afraid of surveilling yourself with audio. always be recording, always be listening, always be improvising, seeing how you're developing things, and then listening back to it and then growing from it, hearing like, okay, I would have done that differently, because you're ultimately an objective viewer hearing that. I hope that answers it.
That really does, and it makes me think of not even just with the sake of composing, but recording oneself practicing, or playing along to something. It's really eye-opening, and you become much more of an objective listener when you listen after the fact, rather than while you're playing. Like when I play drums sometimes, and I feel like it sounds like, oh, like this sounds in the pocket and stuff, but then I listen back and like, oh, like I'm not really in the pocket as much as I thought I was, so definitely listening back to one's performance is the best way I found to learn, and the quickest way.
Now, if you don't mind, can I like revert that question back to both of you, and like like Austin and Mike, you both obviously write music, right?
Yeah.
Is it ever something you meticulously curate and grow over time from the same source material, or is it something that you hear and you develop that heard idea? Like, is it I'm trying to create a binary here, and I know that's not the best thing, especially when talking about music, but when you're writing music, is it something you're audiating at the piano or whatever instrument, or are you writing something down and then trying to develop it over time, or does it depend on the piece? Like, how are you preserving your compositional ideas, and how are you, what's the word, propagating your, the seeds of your ideas? Like I would love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
For me, I write very short. Like, Mike can attest, a lot of my music is 10 bars. A lot of my music, I've written 4-bar songs, and the longest songs I'll ever write are like, I guess like 32 or so. I've done some longer form stuff, but when I do get to a longer form thing, I don't write it like 100 bars at a time. I write like this thing, and then there is a suite that I wrote called Constable, which is like a big something I recorded a couple times, but that was actually put together from 3 smaller pieces that I had wrote them to be totally separate entities, and then I was like, wow, this is actually kind of one idea that I was actually trying to get out. And so when I'm composing, I try to get out the smallest thing I can, that 5-bar phrase I'm hearing, and that becomes the tune. And then occasionally I'll look back and I'll say like, wow, during this whole 3-month period I was super into Ornette, and they all kind of have the same vibe. Or this honestly 2-year period where I've been really into Stefan Harris, it's like, oh shit, all my compositions have this vibe. And then I can kind of mush them together and conglomerate them into maybe a project or an album or a suite or what have you. But for me, it's always just, it's hard for me to conceptualize too many things, so I just get the one idea out as quickly as possible. Most of my tunes are written in 2 hours, tops.
Yeah, and if I can jump on that, I appreciate that answer, and I think it's reiterating the idea that, you be forgiving to yourself if you at some point listen to that again, right? You objectively listened to it and you said, wow, I was listening to a lot of Ornette at the time, and that's okay. That's cool. You went through the process of listening to it again and understanding that this is who I was, and I'm not ashamed of that, right? If that's your personal prerogative, that would be my personal prerogative too. I would agree with that, certainly.
Very proud of it, actually.
Yeah.
I can definitely attest to similar ideas with what Austin was saying. Definitely, I've been into more through composed ideas lately, at least, or really writing down different sections of a piece and trying to work out, just having everything kind of written out. There's this one band in particular called Hella, which I've definitely taken a lot of inspiration from with that kind of writing. And the idea is to just write out basically exactly like what everyone plays and have different sections. So it'll be like A, B, A, introduce a new idea in C, then go back to A, then B. So that's like section writing, you know? So it's kind of similar to taking small chunks and putting them together. And definitely like with writing more, like for example, like a movement. Like I've tried writing a piano movement, and I think it's definitely hard for me. Maybe it's a different tactic of going about it, I feel, as compared to writing a more of like an AABA style tune or something with changes and a melody, but trying to write out like every little thing that goes on the piano or in an arrangement is definitely a whole other challenge. But yeah, from what you were talking about with like the tactic of writing down, it made me think of when I was reading about Paul McCartney and John Lennon, and they would have writing sessions together a lot in their youth or like their late teens. And what they would do is they would bring two guitars together, and they would show each other what they wrote and try to write tunes together. And they didn't write anything down. And Paul said in his biography that if they couldn't remember the tune the next day, then it probably wasn't a good tune. So, and that's like, I assume it's melody and lyrics, but sometimes I've heard, like in, for example, the song Yesterday, they had Folly lyrics. I don't remember them, but I was told that. So, like, they came up with the melody, like, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da, 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 da. You know that, but then they like added these like random lyrics just to like have a placeholder, which is interesting. I never heard of that concept before, but that's another approach that I was trying to mess around with myself too, like really committing something to memory, and if it sticks, then it's good. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
That is actually that is a really, I mean, I might try to shed that that sounds cool, because I'm always like super paranoid that I'll lose something, right?
Yeah.
But there have been things, there have been things where you know, where even when I recorded them on voice memos, like because I wasn't the same person when I was recording it, just feels super foreign. Like I didn't count myself off in the voice memo, and I didn't specify the groove enough.
Right.
Even if I do all of that stuff, like, even if everything's established and all of the groundwork for the listener 10 years from now is there, all of the scholarship and whatever, and making the voice memo perfectly understood, I still feel like, you know, what the hell was I doing? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I didn't develop this in the way I should have. Sometimes it really clicks, right? But yeah, no, that would be interesting. I mean, I think, you know, personally, just for myself, I think oral skills and audiation of a melody and letting it just sit in you and trusting that you'll return to it if it's meant to be is a very great and holistic approach to it. You know, like a mandala, right? You know, like creating a mandala, the beauty in creating one of them.
What is that?
It's like I forget what where it's often created, but yeah, it's a let me just see. Yeah, like, you know, it says here like a geometric figure representing the universe in Hindu and Buddhist symbolism. I know personally, like, you know, I understand mandalas to be like created by, you know, a group of people and perhaps monks, and then they're destroyed, and then there's no evidence of them having preserved that sort of creation they made. It's just something they're creating for the sake of creating it, and if they lose the memory of it, that's the point of it. It's like a spiritual exercise in discipline and creating.
Wow.
Just creating, but
Just
not like
creating,
reaping
yeah.
any benefits from the
No-
creation.
No Instagram likes or anything. Yeah, and I think that's important on your point. That's super important on your point, because if you forget something, maybe it doesn't mean it was bad. Maybe you just had fun making it, and then
Yeah, that's
like
Yeah,
that's a
very
good way of
process
looking about it.
focused. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, because no matter how impactful or world-changing your body of work is, even if you're John Coltrane, impermanence is just an inherent quality of humans. So we can't get too attached to our legacies or our outcomes. It's all dust at the end of the day, So we have to have fun in our process and being creative.
Yeah.
And yeah, can you remind me? Can you send the name of that Hindu figure?
yeah. Here, Mandala, Mandala.
Okay, cool.
Wow.
I just sent a link. Hold on, close that.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm certainly not an authority to talk on this, but this is a
Yeah, but
an
if that's
amazing.
what you took out of it, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's amazing geometric design, and it's just I think it's an amazing objective sense of discipline and artisanship that goes into creating these things, and it's built on the idea of impermanence. I think.
Wow. I've never really thought about a culture having that concept in mind, and I definitely haven't heard of anything like that before, so that's a really cool concept, and that I wonder if anything like that exists in Western culture as well. Do you know of anything that exists like that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. We're obsessed with the opposite. We put our culture is the culture. We put our names on every building we can.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's like a different mindset.
Man, I would say like manuscripts like if you but even then like there's so much work that goes from other people into curating manuscripts, but very seldom have I met a composer or someone that like goes through the trouble of selling their manuscripts to people. Like it could be a good worthwhile educational tool, but I think a lot of the times when you're creating music, and you're writing things on 11 by 17 manuscript paper or score paper, there is that idea that a lot of the stuff that people hear and take out of this in the very early stages of drafting and manuscripting what you're doing, maybe they won't hear that. They won't hear the original idea you had. And I think, as we mentioned, it does go through this telephone effect over time where it perhaps will relate totally different to the listener. I remember one time I actually had the real big fortune of talking with John Fedshock for my jazz history class, and he mentioned that a day of a hard worked day of manuscripts and all of this writing, all this sketching you do that just winds up being thrown in the trash and unused. That's still a deliverable. That's still a final thing you have to show for your day. Right? Like it's just a garbage can full of your ideas, and you grew from that. That's a tangible thing that you're looking at, and you realize I just grew from what I just did. That whole garbage can full of stuff. So.
Another thing that I was thinking about with that idea of maybe producing a selfless piece of work could be from open source code. Do you agree, Austin? I know you delve into that stuff definitely more than me.
There's no such thing as really identity or like personal artistic ownership, let's say, over those type of products, because it's something. It's actually such a beautiful movement, I think. But you're exactly right. It's thousands of people contributing to a project that's not going to have any of their names on it, except for maybe in very fine print on the about page of some website or GitHub. And people are contributing to it not for money or monetary gain, but because they love coding and they believe in the thing that they're making. And open source code runs the world. It's not even like lower quality because people aren't getting paid. It's like Google uses open source code. They open source their code and allow anybody to contribute to it. Microsoft is big on it now. Facebook, every single major website in the world, they're all using open source projects. I don't know. It speaks pretty volumes about human nature that people enjoy contributing to things.
Yeah, even in music, I've used MuseScore before. It's a free notation software.
Oh, they have that online community, right?
Yeah, they have the online community. Also, I've been using Pro Tools recently, which is made by Avid, and they also have some sort of cloud community where people can contribute their arrangements and stuff. I've personally never used either of those communities, but they do exist, and people can submit scores. Let's say they like they copy, transcribe a score for something, then they can put it there, and someone else could find the benefit of it. So,
Of course, what goes without saying though that if it's at the expense of an artist's income, of course that could be dangerous. Like if you're transcribing something and you're taking away the hard work of like a cheap music publisher or some sort of arranger that did the work on behalf of that artist. But I think generally, like especially with the open source coding thing, that's not disenfranchising anybody, right? That's just promulgating great information out to people so that they themselves can learn.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point, actually. In terms of music, just getting your music out there. I've heard stories of artists releasing their music early and for free, just because the record label was making it so difficult for them to go through the label and the proper way of doing it. And just in our day of age, using Spotify and other streaming services, so much of the music is available for free for everyone to use. I just think that's an interesting point. It's kind of similar to the idea of open source code in a way, just because so many artists don't make a lot of money at all with the stuff they produce, unless you're like really gaining a lot of followers on Spotify and stuff. Would you agree or?
Totally, yeah. I don't think knowing at this point in February 2021, like most people that have a session at school or doing something or working with musicians and they post a 30-second clip of it, they know more likely than not that, especially if the production quality isn't great, which you're not expecting, they know that it's not going to circulate and it's not going to beat the algorithm on Instagram. So in a way, it is kind of like sharing it with your own community. It is kind of, unfortunately, it is insular. Like a lot of the stuff that people put out there is really just stays within their own circle because of how the streaming services work or how, algorithm-based platforms or social media or any sort of like RSS feed or whatever. I guess more so algorithm-based networks work. I think, there is just kind of like a doing it for the sake of enjoying it and not for monetary gain. I think that principle is present, manifests in certain ways. Really, I don't think, unfortunately, in our capitalistic culture, spending a lot of time doing something and not having a yield for it can be dissuasive.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like not having, not understanding that it is going to eventually lead to something and that your friends are creating things and putting things out there and giving themselves permission to put their stuff out there, whereas if you're like consistently holding back and writing something and then no one knows you've done it, I would wager that especially American culture would really discourage that, and it makes it seem like you're not productive as a person, which of course I fundamentally disagree with.
So you're talking about the art of putting out a lot of content, even though it's not super polished, compared to not putting out any content, but then maybe more once in a while putting out like a super polished piece of content.
Yeah, and I find myself, I'm really the latter, especially when it comes on
Ah.
social media. Like, I really don't, I'm not someone that posts every day or even every month. I don't really have a social media presence, which I do want to change. I mean, that's something I'm constructively working to change in myself, because it is not a way to, sustain as a musician. It's not possible to sustain what you do just by keeping yourself and keeping your work insular, especially if you're, thinking about what it means monetarily for your craft, right?
Well,
What it'll
I would
bring.
say you're an exception to that because you're a working musician, and you don't have like a very active social media presence at all, and you've made decisions I that might be difficult for other people with a different mindset to make, but you have a great job, and I've seen you work. You take a lot of pride in it, and you're arranging for quartets and very cool musical contexts, and you're making a living with music. And there are people who write ad music and people who score for film, and there are a lot of people who have given up the idea of, okay, my personal art has to be a commercially viable product, but they have
Yeah.
found other ways to make their skills valuable. Music copyists or arrangers, like that honestly is one of the things I admire about you and a lot of my peers that have come out of MSM. I think Manhattan School of Music, they encourage artistry, and they encourage like you to be like the next Ambrose, and like but
Right, of course. And I'm not saying, like, I really, I'm not trying to, like, say that the idea of holding on to something for a long time is to be discouraged, but I think, unfortunately, it is the case that in American society that, like, any sort of, like, capitalist structure correlates productivity with monetary yield.
Yeah.
Right? Or, like, productivity with your value in society. And when I say productivity, I'm saying ostensible, objectively viewable productivity. That's what it is. I mean, like, you're seeing other people be productive, then you're going to believe that they're productive. But then if you see, if someone's not releasing something, I mean, I certainly, like, would become self-conscious that you're not doing a lot with that. That I myself am not putting out a lot as an artist, and I do become insecure. I'll just be open and vulnerable about it. Like, I am insecure with my online presence, and I would like to change that. I think it is possible to amalgamate the two, and I think any sort of, like, really well-adjusted working musician can say, like, it's okay to share with others what you've done, and it's okay to take time with what you're doing. And I think the really important thing, especially in this pandemic, which is exacerbating this very key tenet of what I'm saying, is don't that other people are allowed to be productive, other people are allowed to be unproductive. It ultimately does not matter. We're all in this together. You just value what they do, and trust the process, trust what other people are doing, trust what yourself are doing. I mean, first and foremost,
You say productive, but you can be very productive and be working on a huge work, and may not be releasing any content for quite some time, but you could still be productive and creating.
No, I mean, like, like, really viewable, objective productivity that people would see on social media. Like, unless you're one of those cats that's like, and it's great. I mean, there's, like, that 100th day of practice thing, or, like, there's a lot of my friends and colleagues, like, are sharing their process online, which is great. I mean, it's great to see that, and I think I think that's a really good way to keep people engaged, like, keep your audience engaged with what you're doing. Like, hey, this is what I've been up to. I'm working on this long thing, but I'm going to give you little snippets through the way. And I think nowadays, like, with your brand and what you're developing, and I know you both can testify to this way better than I can, is engaging with your audience is a really key role. And it's okay to be doing that, and it's okay to be keeping your it's okay to be promulgating your productivity to the world. And even if you're not doing any of that, I think the last year or so of the pandemic has made people more empathetic to that. Anyone that wants to take time and do whatever the heck they want to themselves, and they want to spend 6 months, like a true 6 months, like in a room practicing, not sharing anything on social media, they're allowed to do that. But there's no inherent merit in not choosing to share stuff on social media or choosing to share stuff on social media. It's a good way of communicating, I think.
Yeah, this is a topic Mike and I have spoken about at length, and it's something I think about a lot. Especially, I found your point about, what does capitalism value, to be very interesting. For me, the way I think of that idea is it's tough. But the biggest example I can think of where capitalism just grossly does not see the value in it, but it's objectively extremely valuable, is stay-at-home mothers. Like, they're producing incredible value for society, literally teaching the next generation of kids, yet they have no commercial value in the market. And I think I would say art and music, it tends to be in that same category of it's just one of those quirks. But I think the advantage of capitalism is that, honestly, it does unemploy some artists, and it makes them get jobs, and that is a horrible thing and a great thing, because if there was no commercial incentive like that, or kind of existential, you have to make this much money to survive threat, then we'd all be artists and we'd all be creative, and society would cease to function. And so capitalism says, like, you want to sit on your couch and eat Cheetos and sing along to a record or something, but actually, if you want to make any money, you have to produce something valuable to somebody else that somebody else is willing to pay for. And I don't know. The way I've come to terms with this is very unmusical, actually. Is part of the whole reason I started Brave Sound. It's like, I did not want to compromise my art, my process, my music, and I also didn't want to be a big, like, jazz education figure or anything like that. Like, that wasn't at all appealing to me. So I think there are creative ways to be valuable to other people, and not compromise your values artistically. And I wish it was a conversation that we had in music school, because in music school it's just like music performed to the highest ability, but it never at all did they talk about how do we make this relevant to people outside of this building.
That I just want to add a little bit to that thought. I was listening to a podcast with Daniel Elk, who is the CEO of Spotify, and he was talking about how he was raised in a different culture where there was a lot more room to fail, which is that's what I perceived from it. That there's socialized medicine. You don't have to be. I think that there's more cushion just overall in the society, so it's possible to take more risks and not fall on your face. And Austin, I've spoken to you about this before, and your point about how people have that fire, under their butt of saying, like, oh, okay, I really need to push myself to do this, otherwise I'm not going to succeed, I'm not going to make money. That's the gist of it. I think that it made me think of which two are better in society, to have that comfort level where people can feel that they can be creative and pursue things that are maybe a little out of the box, or to have that fire where, like, they know that if I don't succeed, I will, like, be on the street, or I won't make money.
Right.
So
that's like a fascinating balance. You got it, Rob.
Yeah, no, exactly what you were just saying right now. It's a fascinating balance. And if I can jump in, like, and saying that balance itself is something I struggle with, certainly. Like, I often find that I'm giving myself creative room in adversity to what commitments I have. And that sucks. That's not a great thing that I've experienced. Like, that I have to be shoving out what other things I'm doing, and then focusing only on like what I'm writing in order, like, and that's not a practical or nor sustainable way to be existing in society. I like, I as I was mentioning like maybe an hour ago, I work as an organist, and a lot of the stuff like I really don't try to have what I do in the church inform my source material for my compositions. So that is a tangible example of this, where I have to manipulate my brain into like shifting that out and shifting out any other sort of like income-based things I'm doing or other projects or whatever, and then just focusing on the creative work I'm doing, right? And that model is not sustainable in a capitalist society. I am very fortunate where my job as it is structured right now is I'm the weekend organist, and I have sometimes I will have a full week free if I'm not called in to do funerals or any sort of thing for my job, and and of course whatever I'm called in to do for what I have to do, regardless of what the job is, either if it's my organist job or if it's a heavy week of engraving or whatever. I have the privilege to be structuring, like, okay, this is what this week is going to look like, so I know to designate this. But honestly, like, sometimes my best creative work has been done when I knew I shouldn't be doing it, and I'm putting off this other thing, and I'm writing, and this sounds so good, like it's like running up against the grain, or it's like a tight deadline. I'm like, oh man, I really should have set this, I should have like set this up equidistantly over like 3 weeks or whatever. And I feel like some of my best writing and like some of the best stuff I've done like had that spontaneous energy to it, where I felt I was resisting the commitments I had to be doing as a working freelance musician. And that's, of course, not the sustainable place. And, of course, that's also coming from a huge place of privilege where, not everyone has the luxury of being able to choose their weekly commitments. Of course, I recognize that. And, that is part of my argument to kind of, kind of dispel that way of thinking where, I can be able to creatively come up with ideas, or I can develop source material, or I can get that same level of intensity and thought during scheduled time as opposed to when I'm allocating several blocks of time where I should be doing something else, or I'm running way over time, or I'm running super last minute. So that's something, that's one of my current, I think, as I'm, in my mid-20s or whatever. I mean, I don't know if other people can relate to this, but that's one of my current struggles, is just budgeting time and making sure that I can have this fire and this incensed fire of compositional creativity or whatever it is, really just like the urge to work over a longer period of time and in more sane increments that work with a normal capitalistic schedule, because it just forecasts the ability to budget yourself and to be able to structure your ideas in a comprehensible way. That's just really all it is. And I think I really dislike that about myself, is sometimes working in a last minute capacity allows me to produce things that I otherwise would not produce, and I really wish that were differently. And I think a way to fix that for myself is like finding external outlets that might incense that motivation and drive in me, whether that's listening to music or giving myself checkpoints. This has certainly been productive for me as a composer, is giving myself checkpoints. Okay, I have a Friday rehearsal with players. Obviously, in COVID times, it's a little difficult to do this, but if I'm scheduling a Friday rehearsal after that, and then a Wednesday deadline, I'm hearing it. I have to have something for the Friday rehearsal, have to have something the next Friday, and I'm building it, refining it over time. So I think, for me personally, checking in with people and having that constant external stimuli is really important in my writing process.
Can I butt in here, man?
Yeah, sorry.
So at the end there, you were speaking about procrastination and pacing yourself and scheduling, and I'd like to come back to that, but I wanted to touch on this earlier dichotomy that you made, which was this juggle between your paid work and your artistic output. Because I'm thinking about, in a pre-Beethoven society, like the work of Bach, for example, or even, you know, like the commissioned artists of the Renaissance or those type of things, those were not artistic in the modern sense at all. They were strictly commercial works, commissioned for somebody else, kind of like a freelancer, you could say, and they still managed to make some of the most beautiful and consequential work, perhaps in human time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, and I think a modern example of that is like people like John Williams or Hans Zimmer. They don't.
Yeah.
We look back and we say, oh, like this is art, but that's not the mindset. That's not the situation objectively. Objectively, they were hired to do something else, and then they just like they treated it. I don't know if they really treated it as art, but they did it so well that it became art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you should draw such a hard line between like this is my paid work and I don't want it to leak in, because when I got
and if respectfully, I'm not trying to draw that line. It's just in terms of the content itself. Like, I'm not trying to let my voice seep in if I want to create something that's coming from that place of not being from my paid work. But of course, like when it's something that's if I'm being paid to write something, or if I'm writing something for any sort of like venture where I'm going to be putting 100% in, I will put 100% in, and it ultimately is a reflection of who I am, and I will try to try to treat that opportunity as first and foremost a huge privilege, but also with the most respect as to what the situation demands, and whether or not it's and I just think where my frustration comes in is trying to manage several things that by definition might be different in philosophy, like where I'm writing these are situations I'm contriving and subcontracting myself for my own music, whereas this other thing I'm doing for another person, and I'm trying not to let those inform each other, but ultimately just by nature of who I am and who people are, that will. But I'm not, please don't get the idea that I'm gonna be disregarding paid work as sort of ancillary to my own
No, I've seen you do your job, man. That's not what I was insinuating at all. I just really what I was trying to get at was like,
no,
don't be afraid to let it leak, because the stuff you're doing for your church, I've gotten to hear it is so different than the stuff I got to hear you write and perform at Manhattan School of Music. Once I got to like your church world, it was just like, this is a totally different thing, right? But it was deeply impactful nonetheless to hear you work with all these singers and to play those pieces that you performed. And yeah, there's no I just feel like there's no like that is that thing and this is this thing. It's like pretty much all art, paid or not,
I'll be back in a sec, guys, but
Sure.
Continue.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's ultimately it, and I think the inverse is true too. Like I try not to I try not to impose too much of like a different idiom. Like if I'm writing like really crazy multi-tonal stuff in an environment with like a large ensemble, I will try to find the right context for that in the church, and of course there's external barriers like like what is suitable during this time of the year in the Catholic Church, but I am very fortunate, like extremely fortunate, with basically all of my opportunities at the present moment, that I do have a lot of artistic liberty in, choosing repertoire. I am having like a place of authority in terms of like I can be writing my own repertoire. I could be having musicians come in and realize my repertoire, so long as it serves the larger function, which is, the solemnity of the Mass, or in this case, the Brave Sound project, as it's serving the function of my own music, and which is this particular project is just a lot of different styles that I've worked on over time, and it's a study in writing percussive music with percussion not at the forefront, and it's been a huge learning experience for me. And I would like to specify I would like to specify that this concert that I'll be putting on Sunday is it's me just kind of yelling music into the world and workshopping it. And it is it's a refined it's a refined project of stuff that I've worked a lot on, and I've rehearsed a lot with. We had rehearsal even in a snowstorm today. And we're taking COVID precautions to make sure not everyone's in the same room for extremely long period of time. But this kind of music is, I think I'm gaining a lot from this experience, hearing feedback from my great performers, and these questions that people are asking, and what's coming as a result of the information that I've said at the beginning of this kind of podcast was, am I writing music that's best suited for this environment and for this person? And am I writing the music that can be read by anyone, of course in the same caliber, that will be recognized in the same way because of how clear I'm making it for the performer? And it's a huge learning experience for me. So many things like that. Just performer feedback is like super important.
Wow, what a beautiful segue into the show on Sunday. It's everything. It just seems like everything you're doing is serving the music, serving the listener, the audience, serving, like you said, for your church it's the mass. For this project, it's more for you and for Brave Sound and for everybody involved. It is a very selfless approach, and you bring yourself into it when you can. But also on the topic of performer feedback, so I understand Meg Okura, who's playing first violin, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's an
Badass.
extremely accomplished composer and arranger in her own right, as is I'm sure
Yeah.
many other the people in the group. Have you spoken with Meg at all specifically about what's going on with the music on Sunday, or what type of
Yeah, what do you mean by what's going on? Like just
musically,
performance direction? Yeah, well, we've had rehearsals. I mean, I had rehearsal with Meg today, and we had a string quartet plus rhythm section rehearsal minus Jasper on Tuesday. And yeah, I think Meg's been asking really great questions, and we've been really everyone I think has been really focused and into learning the music, and keeping an open dialogue about what works for them with full and transparent honesty, which I appreciate the most as a performer, as a composer and performer. Keeping like an honest dialogue about if something's working or if something's too redundant during the rehearsal process. And I in terms of like Meg's parts, I know as a string player myself, that a lot of it comes from technique and not a lot of usage of the bow, economy of usage in terms of bow speed and bow stroke and stuff, and a lot of it is very complex and verbose, but can be accomplished with not that much bow usage. But it depends on the context. I think in terms of like feedback from the string players, a lot of it just came from did you mean me to give me this note at rehearsal 36, or did you is there a way I can have a cue for this, or there's a lot of like pragmatic things that I might have just overlooked that make our learning experiences only on the bandstand, or only in the experience where you're working with other people. Like there's no way in hell I could like go into Sibelius and be like, oh man, this page turn's really bad for well, that's not such a great example, but like this doesn't feel really great for the performer unless I'm going through each part and really scanning it, which is what a composer should be doing. But just for the sake of this project, I've been just I've been very fortunate to be working with such high caliber musicians, and the questions they're asking are making me really reevaluate what I've been bringing to the table compositionally. Certainly. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you guys went over this already, but what inspired you to have this instrumentation?
So I wanted to kind of, I have these kind of plans for a future album, possibly debut album, of kind of like my own synthesized group of people, like partially electronic, partially acoustic instruments, and I wanted this to kind of just be a vignette of that, like a small reduced group and reduced instrumentation of that. So I wanted to keep it all acoustic for this concert, with minus the electric piano, of course. So it's a string quartet, and it's a clarinet and double bass, piano, and Juan Diego on various percussion. So he's doing a great job, because we added the percussion in last second. Juan Diego he's realizing the panjero part as well as the zabumba part for the bayan groove we have on the first piece, as well as a shaker part for the chacarera groove we have on one of the pieces later in the program. So the idea of adding a percussionist kind of came after the music was written, just to glue it together while we workshopped it and put it out into the world. But ideally, I'd like the percussion to be not at the forefront of the rhythmic sense of the music, but let the rhythms come through in the orchestration. And that's a really big part of this program, is orchestrating out the rhythm. I spent a lot of time kind of conceptualizing that as kind of like a focal element.
It sounds like a lot of this influence could be Brazilian music.
Yeah.
Have you been? I know you studied with a Brazilian singer over the summer, correct?
Yeah,
guitarist.
So fortunately, so my master's degree, I took Brazilian. I think every Brazilian music class offered at MSM, and I'm nowhere near scholar like Master Rogério Bogato is a percussion extraordinaire at Manhattan School of Music, who also teaches classes on Brazilian music history. But definitely learned a lot from him. I took also some great independent studies with Flavio Silva, who's a guitarist, as well as with Ginga, the famous MPB. Well, he's really his own genre of music. Well-known guitarist, Ginga, and his arranger Lula Galvão, and Ginga's I think girlfriend Ana Pais, who's also a really amazing, beautifully established songwriter. I know Austin, we covered the same tune of hers in different arrangements.
Yeah.
And then also her brother. I've had some, so I have some really good connections I've made. Artistically, very fortunate, through Rogério or through, actually Zabeth was the one who hipped me to who Ginga was in the first place. Zabeth Perez, who's one of her pieces I'm doing for this concert as well, an arrangement of one of her compositions.
Really?
But I wouldn't say it's mostly Brazilian, though. I would say it's Brazilian, and there's arrangements of there's arrangements of great American songbook tunes like Billy Strayhorn, and then there's arrangements of Argentinian styles. But I would say maybe like a mixture of South American styles and American style. Just call it American music or something. But it really varies. Yeah, it's just kind of it's just kind of all over the place. So
yeah. I mean, stylistically and like all the sources you're drawing from, it is all over the place. But when you scan through like the program earlier when we were sound checking, it was just like, that's all I was thinking. I was like, this is Rob. I don't know, something about it. It's really though, it could only been you to put together this program. I never would have thought to conceptualize something like this, and neither would have Mike. And
can you put
awesome.
the program out, because I think I missed it?
Yeah, I can show the scores for each thing really quick. The first page of each score. So this is the first piece, Fifrelim, which is a bayan groove, which was written as my Ritmica final project. Ritmica is a class.
That's where I know this from. Fifrelim, yes.
Fifrelim, yes.
I did it with Rogério as well, yeah.
Yeah, this is I called it Fifrelim too, but I decided, since I just wanted to be obnoxious, I just call it Fifrelim. It's based out of the textbook called Ritmica, by Jose Eduardo Gramani, who is Brazilian educator in rhythm. Of course, Rogério teaches a class that follows this concept of ritmica with a lot of independent lines working against each other, working as an ostinato, not so much focusing on the verticality of rhythm, but more so on the horizontal, the linear motion of things relating to each other and keeping steady against each other. Very cursory explanation, but that's where this kind
really
of piece
good.
was.
It's hard to explain.
Yeah, no, that's where this piece was conceptualized. I'll show you this score really quick. You can see it's in a time signature just for the sake of what the players are singing. But in the case where I had months and months with the players and I could teach them the ritmica concept, and I myself could shed the ritmica concept, this is what the alternative score looks like, where it's built into cells, rhythmic cells. Each one corresponds to a rhythm cell in the 2-1 series, which is it's like kind of like a a 2-1 series. It's like the like an index of rhythms that are performed in succession, wherein a 16th note is added to each consecutive unit. So the first unit is very simply an 8th note and a 16th note. The second unit is 8th note, 16th, 16th. And they're performed directly in succession with no breath in between. Da, 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 diki, da, diki, da, da, diki, da, right? So, and then you keep adding one, you merge them into 1/8 note. But anyway, but this is built on 3 units of that 2-1 series. And that's where the melody came from. You can see the bar line is it's based on the phrase, which is what I wanted for this particular score.
Man, this looks wild.
Yeah, so this was what it originally was conceived as for my final, was
Jeez, man.
kind of like these rhythmic units working against each other, a very straight quarter note pandeiro or triangle pattern working against these stagnant stoic rhythmic cells that are happening. So it's really this like constant juxtaposition, and you'll hear it. You'll definitely hear it. The string players have the pandeiro and triangle rhythm, which is super challenging against the Hamish and Sam playing the
It also
these
helps
grooves.
that I'm pretty sure all the MSM guys probably taken this class. I know Juan Diego has, because I took it with them, and I probably Sam and Hamish as well. It's pretty.
Yeah, it's cool, and it's cool like hearing it back. Like you can hear it, but as Master Rogério would tell you, it takes a really true, deep, and intrinsic study of this to kind of really understand like how to perform this type of music. So that's why I didn't really care to spend so much time precious rehearsal time teaching this concept, whereas they would be coming from the concept and understanding it better. So I just decided to write it out and kind of give a cursory understanding of this is how I would like you to feel it, think about it as the phrase, and try to do your best to perform within the beaming, which in some cases makes sense. But so that's the first piece. The second piece is a samba canção. I can kind of just explain this one very briefly as well. It's basically a cello feature, like with the cello functioning as the male voice, singing this lullaby. Dorme bem translates to sleep well. Singing this lullaby with piano accompanying, piano functioning as the role of the guitar. This essentially where my philosophy was on this composition was I wanted to write a samba canção that was felt out of time but still codified in a time signature.
Say it again. A samba.
Samba. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So samba canção.
What is that?
Yeah. So it's a style of Brazilian music that means song, means samba song, which is a style. It's a very it's a very lush and beautifully out of time, like maybe the equivalent of like a jazz ballad or something.
Like a rubato.
Rubato-esque, but it could also be in time. It's something that usually just expresses like some sort of slow Garfinho rhythm in the samba, but also allows the performer to be a little more expressive and take more rhythmic liberty. And of course, I'm not explaining that with the best degree of accuracy, but that definitely did inform my writing of this, was the kind of mellifluous content that would come as a result of this, like samba canção. Thinking about melody first and foremost. So this melody is it's felt as it is, as it comes, right? Right, like something like that, where it'll go briefly, and I hit a few wrong notes there, but it'll go briefly into 5/8, and then come back into 6/8, and then you'll feel it. The listener will see they'll just feel it as one like large thing. That's what I hoped for with this, and it actually has been met with some degree of success. Writing backgrounds, like fabricating rubato, and writing backgrounds in this fabricated rubato, where instead of taking an extra eighth note as rubato, I wrote the extra eighth note in. Does that make sense? Am I being clear? Yeah, am I being clear?
It's codified liberty.
So, and it was actually like, I'm actually super intrigued with how this is coming out, because it feels super organic, but it's like, it's super not, like every bar is a different time signature. I mean, you'll hear it like,
wow,
I can't wait.
And I mean, there's like the string players, everyone's reacting really well to this, and I'm really happy about that. It's a cello feature, but there's a lot of backgrounds based off of it. And so that's this piece. Just really wanted to write something that was a fabricated rubato, but did not seem fabricated.
It reminds me of when I was a freshman at MSM, and I was in this combo, and the trumpet player in my combo, Nick DiMaria, he wrote this piece with a chorale section opening it up, and I think originally the piece was just in like 4/4 in the beginning, and everyone had to take breaths, but there was an issue where guys were coming in early, and what he did, and I think what was suggested by the teacher, was to codify it just like what you were doing, to make it like an extra 5/8 measure, for instance, which sounds really weird, but I mean, when you listen back to it and you don't know the music, then you just think that everyone's taking a breath. I think it's interesting. I think this method works well, especially if a lot of people are coming from different musical backgrounds. For example, like jazz musicians don't have they don't have as much experience playing like together on a breath compared to like a string quartet, for instance. Where they're playing and they have to all really breathe together. It's just not the same experience. I mean, like a big focus is improvisation for jazz musicians, so it's an interesting process what you're doing, and I totally like understand where your head's at, because I like doing the same thing a lot when I'm writing music. No, I'm sorry to interrupt. No, I'm just saying, like, if anyone's thinking about doing this, like, try it. That's all my advice is. Like, that's great that you try that. I think it's really cool. Like, it's because this is part of this. It also falls back into the objectivity thing I was talking about. Like, if you're hearing something, and if it's the difference between an ensemble getting it and an ensemble not getting it, like, why not write that extra 5/8 bar in? And it sounds great. Like it's really interesting, especially like. You consider subdivisions, you consider maybe like expression against the subdivisions. All it is that you're not codifying things into a box. You're just giving yourself, you could just think of it as giving yourself more opportunity now. Like, okay, now I have all this opportunity to be writing, I can be writing backgrounds, and I can maybe write like a rhythmic juxtaposition against this. And, and I think, you're opening up a new door, and I think there's so much merit, obviously, in just unaccompanied and ballad music that's not written. It's just written in quarter notes or whatever, right? Or just guitar and voice. I mean, there's some of the most beautiful, probably my favorite music out there is that kind of stuff. Samba canção with just guitar and voice. But I think it's a cool thing worth exploring, like creating that vibe
in a different way, and then exploring that avenue once you have it in a time signature. Like, okay, what if I add a drum set here, or what if I,
Yeah.
like, what if I wanted to do a metric modulation or something. I mean, I don't know. I'm just maybe getting a little too ahead of myself here, but
even the premise of the rhythms in Brazilian music in particular, it's hard to quantize that. So I'm curious, did you
Yeah,
like, for
samba.
example, like yeah, or like the pandero part is like, it's like, it's not straight or swung. It's a, I don't know if you heard what I was playing, but it
yeah, I heard. Yeah, I mean, in context of, I mean, it wouldn't be in this style, right? It wouldn't really be in this samba cansao style, but in the Fifth Relief style, yeah, like, the
Yeah.
pandero as it fits into the northeastern bayan groove, the specific type of bayan, which is the main bayan, which is yeah, like, it has this intrinsic swing to it, which, when it's done consistently, against the triangle or whatever, against these kind of rhythmic motives, gives it a new element of flavor. Whereas if you were just doing it by itself, it has its own identity, right? So I think you're creating new identities, like, with whatever sort of thing that you doubt in whatever you're doing in terms of your arranging or your music. I don't think you should be afraid to create new identities, or create new opportunities for yourself to explore. Even if it's a total failure, which I've had total abysmal failures, even by no subjective sense of the means, like I would think anyone would think is objective failure. Like, I've had so much stuff out there that just catapulted, but I'm glad I did it. Like, I'm glad I wrote that way, and I'm glad I learned from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, but if I can just jump through the other ones, Saudade is a bossa nova. And then those are the three Brazilian styles, right? It's a bossa nova, slower one, featuring clarinet. There's the Si Pudiera Vivir, which is a Argentinian chacarera, which is a duplatized 6/8. Well, it's a 6/8 or 3/4 duplatized. Which this is an arrangement of a Zabeth Perez tune. She went over the rhythms with me, and I also did some work on my end and got the various elements of the the bombo liguero, and then the higher timbre percussion kind of working against each other, and it's this constant 3/4 and 6/8 swung kind of thing happening. And what Zabeth did, which I have to give a huge shout out to, is she wrote contrast in the macro form, which I think is just exceptionally done. The way she wrote for this one part, and because I don't really have her permission to be playing the music right now, but you'll hear it, I think, on Sunday, and then like what she wrote in terms of the original recording was for these like middle level sections, right? Like, you have this main head, like da ba da do de bo do da dee da, da bo de ba da do do ba ba da da bo dee da do ba do de do do yo do do ba do de do bo dee da do de do do de do do da 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 do de da da, something like that. And what's cool about that, just speaking in terms of rhythm, is this groove that's so established that hits on 2 and 3, and it's like this 6/8, and it's very hemiolic, right? There's a lot of like overlap stuff happening, and there's never an accent on one. That she, as is common, in any sort of like style of rhythm, it's never the same thing for 4 bars. That would be redundant and boring. Like, there's always variance. There's always some sort of like intrinsic humanistic variance to whatever you do, right? Humans can't be quantized. What's cool is that sometimes the bombo liguero in the chacarera groove allows for that, right? So you have this cyclical thing happening. She what Zabeth did, which I thought was really amazing, was incorporated that with a series of 2/5s, right? Bodi, like, there's this release from this tension that's happening, like. Right, like she has this like kind of just almost stop time, but it's not really that, but this total change of pace and reassessment of pace that happens in the middle of the form, which I just think is really ingenious, and I'm beholden to her for writing that in, because it makes the arrangement sounds damn good at that point, and it's just a great melody. Like, Zabeth knows, I mean, she knows what she's doing, and beholden to her for working with me.
Did she post this with her playing bass and singing?
No.
Okay.
No, this is a tune of hers that she's written. I do not think she's released it, but I know she recorded it, and I have the original recording. And maybe, I could just have to ask her permission. Maybe after the case, we can possibly allow for that recording to be promulgated in some way. But I'll talk to her. I can talk to her if she'd be comfortable with that. 'Cause this is an amazing piece. Yeah, she really.
Yeah,
so that's
when
this.
you were playing the melody, it sounded like something I'd heard her put out, but maybe that's just how she writes melodies. Sometimes.
It's great. I mean, it's a great melody, and it's a long form, and it's a great long form. And then so that's that in terms of rhythmic based work. And then I have two other arrangements that kind of explore rhythm in their own way. Just a cute little but beautiful, just one go through the head, and then and then I have this kind of expansive arrangement of blood count, which is kind of crazy, and I almost want to designate airtime for an Our Father for both the string players and myself to get through this, because this is a very ambitious work. That's but they're doing a great job with it. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm really grateful that I have the people that I do, because they're willing to step into this, and it's great. I actually have a rehearsal with the strings on Saturday for this, so
wow.
That's it. That's the whole program.
Beautiful. When you said you were doing blood count, I did not anticipate it to look like that.
Well, the melody's there, but it's definitely re-examined and reimagined. Yeah.
It's kind of similar to what we got to do with My Favorite Things, though probably less involved. My Favorite Things was probably less involved, it looks like, than
right.
This was.
Oh, you're talking. Yeah. But that I didn't even think that one was that ambitious, right? This is reference to the very informal.
It was pretty ambitious.
This one, right? Instead of starting on E flat minor, right? I go on F minor.
Yeah.
What is it? Yeah, I kind of like to tether between like the minor 7th and the 11th, then minor 9th, and then something like something like that. But that's just the whole point of that being like I plane between two chords, but they're not really relevant to the tonal center. But
yeah,
I would wager
that you had a lot of phrases that were, let's say, ambitious.
Yeah. That was based on the melody, but yeah, I try to, that was my own thing, and that was just something I wanted to try out with people, and I was happy with it. That was a summer where I had surgery, and I was spending a lot of time in front of my computer, and I mixed and mastered the whole thing just for myself for fun, and this is in reference to a very informal project I did over the summer with my friends, RB and Friends, which I have actually out there on YouTube, and you're encouraged to check it out if you'd like.
I think I put a link to the Bandcamp in the description of this video.
Cool, yeah. So if you are so enticed, you can check out RB and Friends, and then that track and reference is My Favorite Things, which also has been adapted for big band as well, but performance TBD.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, Rob. Well, I guess the last thing I'll ask for is, I just thought a lot of this conversation we had, I mean, kind of at the end we got into some nitty gritty of meter and like practicalities, but a lot of the first half was just about so many things that are just so difficult to talk about and teach, right? Because all the information in the world is out there, like the range of the French horn, the lowest note on this, how to read alto clef or whatever, like that's all beyond accessible, right? But these things that we were talking about with process, with mindset, with vulnerability, with selflessness, with all these things, like these are the intangibles that you're only going to get from a real working musician like yourself, and between friends, and people in the work. So lastly, I just wanted to ask you if any of these great mentors that you've had. We didn't even get into that really, but Jim McNeely or anybody.
Oh my God.
If they've given you any advice, not so like practical, like never voice flugelhorns with clarinet or whatever.
Oh
but
my,
like,
yeah, I mean
something that
everything.
changed you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, everything. You know, you know, and I'm stressing, like, you know, I'm stressing like a lot about, you know, myself and my own compositional input at this point in the life. But yeah, I'm definitely very much heavily influenced by I'm beholden to and influenced by so many of my mentors, you know, whether that's Dave Olama, especially Jim McNeely, my professor of jazz composition from MSM, who taught me the value of internalizing, listening, and just getting stuff on the paper, having a deadline as very important, you know, and the inflexibility of a deadline to be a motivating factor, a motivating catalyst to getting, you know, your work out there. And, you know, I have so much, you know, of course, practical stuff that Professor McNeely has taught me, but also just in terms of like, you know, what it means to be a composer, and working with other musicians, and what it means to, like, you know, really be listening and to be understanding who you're writing for. And you know, currently I'm very fortunate to be working with a great friend of mine, Eliana Fishbane. We've been doing this.
Yeah.
We've been meeting very frequently, maybe like once every few weeks, and we're, you know, working on an analysis project of Jim McNeely's music.
Can't wait to see
And
that.
yeah, we're trying to analyze it, and first and foremost in a way of how he was conceptualizing it when he wrote it, right? Because it's one thing to just analyze and, you know, to try to get all Heinrich Schenker on it, you know, Schenkerian analysis. If you want to do your own research on that, it's not worth the airtime on this podcast right now. But that's the one personal vibe. Sorry. If you want to just look up like Schenkerian analysis and all that stuff, but you know, it's one thing to analyze that way and analyze, like, you know, oh, when they were really voicing, like, you know, it's this one thing, like this one descent of the melody is what makes this art worthwhile. I think this is total baloney. I think I'm approaching all of that stuff that Jim does, which is great technical stuff, but that's coming from a visceral core place in his heart, right? Where like he's writing this stuff and he's like truly feeling it, and he knows the musicians that are playing it, and there's so much great resplendent information in the stuff that he's doing. I took on the part of the project that deals with macro form, and I see like how, you know, my friend Eliana and I are consistently comparing our, you know, analyses of the charts together, and I'm coming from it from a macro formal point of view, where I see how Jim's developing his music in a way of like how a section relates to another section, and how maybe the same source material can be obfuscated or can be transformed in some way. And a lot of the time, you know, these are not conscious decisions that are made, but sometimes they are, and we're really just trying to get into his brain and see how that happens. So I think the majority of what I'm learning from Professor McNeely is just through his music, and then, you know, verified and validated through these verbal conversations we have with him about like this amazing stuff he's written and how he's conceptualizing it, which honestly is a different answer each time. I think that makes it really interesting. And you know, of course, other mentors I have, it's too many to name. I mean, there's Rogerio, and there's of course Phil Markowitz, Professor Phil Markowitz, who I studied with also at MSM privately, and there's just too many to name. And you know, every single person has a really unique and special lens on this music, and really fortunate to be working and learning and in their presence. So of course, you know, in everything I say, I mean, it's just complete gratitude to those people. Yeah.
What's some advice that you can give to someone, a younger composer, or someone that wants to be involved with such a multitude of projects that you yourself are in? For instance, maybe you can give some examples of I don't want to say mistakes, because like I think that all mistakes can be learned from and aren't really mistakes, but some things that you think younger composers could learn from.
Well, in the word, yeah, in the words of the late great, very very sad he passed away, but the late great Chick Corea, if you want to learn how to write, write, right? And I'm saying write as a qualifier. If you want to learn how to write, write. That's how you do it. I'm paraphrasing, but the best advice for young composers is to compose, to learn what they're doing and learn along the way, and don't be ashamed to be embarrassed by what you write. Don't be ashamed to take an objective look at what you're doing, and reassess it as a different person. Or don't be ashamed to take an objective look at what you're doing and think, this is okay, I want to keep it this way. I was happy with how, I'm happy with the process of how it came to be and who I was listening to. And just in whatever you do, don't beat yourself up and keep doing it. I think that's the salient thing, is just to keep doing it and get as much experience you can with having the fortune of working with musicians, especially being in New York, is a really amazing thing.
That's beautiful.
Pushing on.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's about the time for our ending 90-second fire round of questions, of very, very tough questions that we asked you to answer in 90 seconds. Very, very intense ones.
Oh my! Wait, how long do I have to answer them?
Oh, you answer as many as you can in 90 seconds.
Okay. Oh my God.
Mike, as is tradition, can you take the first one?
Sure.
Okay.
What?
Timer starts now.
Okay. What's your favorite topping on pizza?
Anchovies.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
No. Oh, whatever. Just be safe. Don't hurt anyone. Yeah, whatever. I mean, do whatever you want. Yeah, that's fine. Yes.
What's your go-to deli order?
Okay. Croissant with butter on it, and then they put it on like the panini press. Man, it's so good.
That sounds delicious.
It's so good, man. Better than a chopped cheese.
Why do you have a sitar?
I studied Indian music in my undergrad, and I found it for cheap on Craigslist, and I'm so fascinated by the instrument and the idea of sympathetic strings, and there's so much to learn on it still. Here it is.
Right.
It needs to be repaired. Yeah.
Roughly how many instruments do you own?
Do I own? Well, 4 plus the piano right now.
Okay.
But yeah, no. Yeah, like the ones that I own and frequently play, or that's the ones I own. So like maybe 3 or 4.
Favorite pop singer, like semi-current, like 2010s.
I like Sufjan Stevens.
Yeah.
And
that was our 90 seconds, so that's all you get. That's what we're cutting you off at.
And,
no, you got any others?
who other favorite pop singers? I mean, I love Ariana Grande's voice. I mean, anyone. I mean, I love the female voice in music is so amazing, because I'm speaking into a AKG C12, multi-dynamic condenser microphone right now, and I have a super high appreciation for coloration of these mics in terms of like how they treat the female voice. Right now, actually, my favorite pop singer right now is the client I'm doing a project for, Anna, because I love working on her music. The answer is always going to change, whatever I'm listening to. But right now, I'm working a lot on this independent project of a client's music, and it's pop music, and I'm having a lot of fun putting it together, producing it. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody who's listening. I'll check and make sure there's not any more comments or anything. But yes, to anybody who's on the line, this has been a very enjoyable conversation with our great friend Robert Buonaspina. Tickets for his Sunday show, which happens at 5 p.m. Eastern this Sunday, February 21st.
Yes.
That is in the description of this video. If you enjoyed hearing from Rob, where can people reach out to you?
Website soon and coming. I'd say 1 month from now, my website's coming.
Right. You want to shout your Instagram handle out either?
Yes. My Instagram handle is Buonaspina.
Our Buonaspina.
And that can be spelled R-B as in boy, U-O, N as in Nancy, A, S as in Sam, P as in Peter, I-N as in Nancy, A, or Austin can write it in the description here.
Yeah, I believe it is. But anyway, thank you so much, Robert. I wish everybody
Thank
a
you,
good
Robert.
night. And
Thank you both so much.
Right. And I hope to see you guys this Sunday.